The screams from the bedroom above the general store had stopped 3 hours ago, and Natalie Morrison knew that meant her husband was finally asleep. She sat perfectly still on the wooden floor of their small living quarters, her back against the wall, watching the rise and fall of his chest from across the room as he sprawled across their bed in a drunken stupor. The bruise on her cheek throbbed with each heartbeat, and her ribs ached when she breathed too deeply. But she had learned long ago that making any sound would only wake him and start the whole terrible cycle again. It was April of 1873, and she had been married to Gerald Morrison for exactly 2 years, 2 months, and 14 days, each one stretching longer than the last, each one teaching her that marriage was nothing more than legalized suffering for a woman who had nowhere else to go. The morning light crept through the thin curtains, and Natalie finally allowed herself to stand, moving slowly so her movements would not disturb the floorboards. She was 22 years old, though she felt ancient, worn down by the weight of her circumstances. Her parents had died of fever when she was 19, leaving her alone in Springerville, Arizona territory, with nothing but a small house that she could not maintain on her own. Gerald had seemed like salvation then, a man with a steady income from his father's general store, someone who could provide stability. She had not loved him, but she had thought perhaps respect and companionship would be enough. She had been desperately, tragically wrong. Gerald had shown his true nature 3 days after their wedding, backhanding her across the face because his dinner was too cold. It had only gotten worse from there. He drank heavily, spending money they did not have on whiskey, and when he drank, his fists flew freely. Natalie had tried to leave once, 6 months into the marriage, but she had nowhere to go. Her parents' house had been sold to pay their debts. She had no family, no money of her own, and the law saw her as Gerald's property, not as a person with rights. The marshal had laughed when she had timidly suggested that perhaps her husband should not beat her unconscious, suggesting that she should be a better wife if she wanted better treatment. She moved to the small wash basin and cleaned her face carefully, wincing as the cold water touched her split lip. The woman staring back at her from the cracked mirror looked like a stranger, all hollow eyes and sharp cheekbones. She had lost weight because Gerald often ate most of the food, leaving her with scraps. She had lost the light in her eyes because there was nothing left to hope for. She had lost herself somewhere in the endless cycle of violence and apologies, of promises to change that never materialized, of nights spent wondering if this would be the time he actually killed her. The general store below their living quarters would open in an hour, and Gerald would expect her to work the counter while he nursed his hangover in the back room. Natalie had become good at painting on a pleasant expression, at greeting customers as if her world was not crumbling around her, at pretending that everything was perfectly normal. The people of Springerville either did not notice or did not care. Some of the older women occasionally gave her pitying looks, but no one intervened. This was simply how things were. Men had dominion over their wives, and what happened behind closed doors was not anyone else's concern. She was arranging the shelves when the bell above the door chimed, announcing the first customer of the day. Natalie looked up from the fabric bolts she had been organizing and felt her breath catch slightly. The man who entered was tall, probably in his mid-20s, with sun-weathered skin and kind eyes the color of summer grass. He wore dusty traveling clothes and a hat that had seen better days, and he carried himself with a quiet confidence that spoke of capability without arrogance. He removed his hat as he stepped inside, revealing dark hair that needed cutting, and offered her a polite nod. "Morning, madam," he said, his voice a low rumble that somehow managed to be gentle. "I am looking for some supplies. Just rode into town and will be staying for a spell." "Of course," Natalie said, her voice coming out softer than she intended. She cleared her throat and straightened her shoulders, trying to project competence despite feeling like she might shatter at any moment. "What do you need?" "Flour, coffee, beans, some salt pork if you have got it," he said, his eyes scanning the shelves. Then his gaze landed on her face, and she saw the precise moment when he noticed the bruise on her cheek, the swelling around her lip. Something shifted in his expression, a flash of anger quickly controlled, replaced by concern. "Are you all right, madam?" "I am fine," Natalie said automatically, the lie smooth from years of practice. "I had a fall yesterday, clumsy of me." The man looked at her for a long moment, and she had the uncomfortable feeling that he could see right through her deception. But he did not challenge her, just nodded slowly and turned his attention back to the supplies he needed. "Name is Zachary Dalton," he offered as she began gathering his items. "Most folks call me Zach." "Natalie Morrison," she replied, keeping her eyes on her work. "My husband and I run this store." She saw him glance toward the back room where Gerald's snores could be faintly heard, and his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. But when he spoke, his tone remained pleasant. "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Morrison. Fine town you have got here. I am planning to do some work on the ranch just outside of town, the old Henderson place. Heard they were looking for someone who knew horses." Natalie knew the Henderson ranch well. Old Mr. Henderson had died last winter, and his son Marcus had been struggling to keep the place running on his own. The ranch was about 3 miles outside of Springerville, a decent spread with good grazing land and a reputation for quality horses. If Zachary Dalton was going to work there, that meant he would be around for a while, possibly a long while. "The Hendersons are good people," she said, packing his supplies into a burlap sack. "That will be $3.20. Zachary counted out the money carefully, his hands rough with calluses but steady. As he handed her the coins, their fingers brushed briefly, and Natalie jerked back as if burned. She was not accustomed to gentle touches, and even that brief, innocent contact felt dangerous somehow. Zachary noticed her reaction, and that concerned look deepened in his eyes, but he did not comment on it. "Thank you kindly, Mrs. Morrison," he said, shouldering his supplies. "I expect I will be seeing you around." "Have a good day, Mr. Dalton," she replied, already turning back to her shelves, desperate to end the interaction before Gerald woke and found her talking to a strange man. Her husband's jealousy was as unpredictable as his temper, and she had learned that even innocent conversations could result in punishment. Zachary left, the bell chiming softly as the door closed behind him, and Natalie released a breath she had not realized she was holding. There had been something in his eyes, a gentleness that she had forgotten could exist in men, and it unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. She had built walls around herself, thick and high, because it was the only way to survive. Letting anyone close, letting anyone see the truth of her situation, that would only make things worse. Gerald emerged from the back room an hour later, looking green around the edges and meaner than usual. He barely glanced at Natalie as he helped himself to the money in the cash box, pocketing half of what Zachary had paid for his supplies. This was not unusual. Gerald regularly took money from the store to fund his drinking, and the business was slowly failing because of it. His father, who had built the general store from nothing, had died disappointed in his son, but that had not inspired Gerald to change his ways. "Any customers?" Gerald asked, his voice rough with the aftereffects of whiskey. "One," Natalie replied, keeping her tone neutral. "A man named Zachary Dalton. He is going to work at the Henderson ranch." "Never heard of him," Gerald muttered, rubbing his temples. "You get the money from him. Yes, $3.20. Gerald grunted and stumbled toward the door. I am going out, watch the store. Natalie did not ask where he was going. She already knew. He would go to the saloon, drink away the money he had just stolen from their business, and come home tonight in another rage. The pattern was as predictable as sunrise and just as inescapable. The day passed slowly, with a handful of customers coming and going. Mrs. Patterson, the minister's wife, bought thread and gave Natalie a searching look that suggested she suspected the truth about the bruises. Miss Clara Jenkins, the schoolteacher, purchased some paper and pencils and chatted pleasantly about her students. Mr. Abernathy, who owned the livery stable, came in for tobacco and complained about the heat. Normal, everyday interactions that felt like play acting, like Natalie was watching someone else live her life while she observed from a great distance. When the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Natalie closed the store and climbed the stairs to their living quarters with leaden feet. She prepared dinner, knowing Gerald would likely be too drunk to appreciate it, but also knowing that not having dinner ready would guarantee a beating. She made beef stew with the tougher cuts of meat that did not sell well in the store, stretching their meager ingredients as far as they would go. Gerald came home just after dark, stumbling and reeking of whiskey. He looked at the stew with bleary eyes and then knocked the bowl off the table with one sweep of his arm, sending it crashing to the floor in a spray of hot liquid and shattered ceramic. "This is what you feed me," he snarled, his words slurring together. "Garbage. You are useless, you know that? Useless." Natalie stood frozen, her eyes on the ruined meal spreading across the floorboards. She had learned that responding only made things worse, that silence was sometimes the only shield she had. "Look at me when I am talking to you," Gerald shouted, grabbing her by the arm and yanking her around to face him. His grip was bruising, his fingers digging into her flesh hard enough to leave marks. "You think you are better than me. You think you can disrespect me in my own house." "I am sorry," Natalie whispered, the words automatic. "I will make something else." "Damn right you will," Gerald said, shoving her away roughly. She stumbled and caught herself on the edge of the table, her hip connecting with the wood hard enough to make her gasp. But she did not cry out, did not protest. She just straightened and began cleaning up the mess, her hands shaking slightly as she picked up the broken pieces of the bowl. Gerald watched her for a moment, then seemed to lose interest. He collapsed onto the bed and was snoring within minutes, leaving Natalie to clean up the stew and prepare something new. Her hip throbbed where it had hit the table, and she knew it would be black and blue by morning, another injury to hide beneath her long skirts. As she worked, she allowed herself to think briefly of Zachary Dalton, of his kind eyes and gentle voice. She wondered what it would be like to be married to a man like that, someone who seemed capable of basic human decency. But she pushed the thought away quickly. Such fantasies were dangerous. They made her current reality even harder to bear, and there was no escape regardless. She was trapped, bound by law and circumstance to a man who saw her as property at best, a punching bag at worst. The next few weeks fell into the same terrible rhythm. Gerald drank, spent money they did not have, and took out his frustrations on Natalie. She worked the store, painted on her false smiles, and survived one day at a time. Zachary Dalton became a regular customer, stopping by the store every few days for supplies. He was always polite, always respectful, and he always looked at her with that same concerned gentleness that made her chest ache with something she could not name. She learned things about him through their brief conversations. He was 26 years old, originally from Texas, and had been working ranches since he was 14. He was good with horses, patient and skilled, and Marcus Henderson had apparently been thrilled to hire him. He had never been married, which surprised Natalie given that he was handsome and seemed to have his life together. Most men his age were already settled down with families. Just never found the right woman, I suppose, Zachary said one afternoon when she had made a comment to that effect, trying to fill the awkward silence while she measured out oats for him. My father always told me that marriage was too important to rush into, that I should wait until I found someone I could respect and cherish. Seemed like good advice. Natalie felt a pang of something sharp and bitter. Respect and cherish. What lovely, impossible concepts. Your father sounds like a wise man, she said softly. He was, Zachary agreed, and there was genuine warmth in his voice. He passed 5 years ago, but I still hear his voice in my head sometimes, guiding me. He and my mother had a real partnership, you know. They made decisions together, supported each other. That is what I want if I ever do marry. A true partner, not just someone to cook and clean. The words hung in the air between them, and Natalie had to look away, her eyes stinging with tears she refused to shed. The contrast between what Zachary described and her own marriage was too stark, too painful. She finished measuring the oats with hands that trembled slightly and accepted his payment without meeting his eyes. Mrs. Morrison, Zachary said gently, and there was something in his tone that made her look up despite herself. If you ever need help with anything, you can come to the Henderson Ranch. Day or night, it does not matter. You understand? Natalie stared at him, her heart pounding. He knew. Somehow, despite her careful lies and practiced smiles, he knew exactly what Gerald was doing to her. The knowledge should have embarrassed her, should have made her defensive, but instead she felt a curious relief. Someone saw her. Someone cared. Thank you, she whispered, the words barely audible, but I am fine. Everything is fine. Zachary looked like he wanted to argue, but he just nodded slowly and gathered his supplies. The offer stands, he said firmly. Always. After he left, Natalie found herself touching her cheek where the latest bruise was beginning to fade from purple to yellow-green. She tried to imagine actually taking Zachary up on his offer, showing up at the Henderson Ranch in the middle of the night, asking for help. But where would she go after that? What would she do? Gerald would never let her leave, and the law would side with him. A wife's place was with her husband, no matter how brutal he might be. Running would only make things worse. That night, Gerald came home earlier than usual and in a particularly foul mood. Apparently, he had lost money gambling at the saloon, money they desperately needed for the store's expenses. He blamed Natalie, of course, claiming that if she was a better wife, he would not need to drink and gamble to escape his miserable life. The beating was worse than usual. Gerald's fists connected with her ribs, her stomach, her back. He grabbed her hair and slammed her head against the wall hard enough to make her vision swim with stars. When she fell to the floor, he kicked her, his boot catching her in the hip, the shoulder, the spine. She curled into a ball, protecting her head as best she could, and waited for it to be over. Eventually it was. Gerald staggered back, breathing hard, and looked down at her with disgust. "Clean yourself up," he spat. "You look pathetic." He left then, slamming the door behind him as he went back out into the night, presumably to drink more. Natalie lay on the floor for a long time, pain radiating through her entire body. She thought she might have a cracked rib. Her head throbbed where it had hit the wall, and she tasted blood in her mouth. Moving was agony, but she forced herself to sit up, then to stand, using the wall for support. She made it to the wash basin and cleaned the blood from her face with shaking hands. The woman in the mirror looked like a ghost, all pale skin and dark shadows. Natalie touched her ribs gingerly and winced. She needed help, but there was no one to turn to. No doctor would go against Gerald, and even if one would, she had no money to pay for treatment. Without consciously deciding to do so, Natalie found herself pulling on her shawl and slipping out of the building. It was late, well past midnight, and Springerville's streets were empty and dark. She moved slowly, each step sending fresh waves of pain through her battered body, but she kept going. She did not let herself think about what she was doing, because if she thought about it, she would lose her nerve. The walk to the Henderson ranch took nearly an hour, 3 times as long as it should have, because she had to stop frequently to rest and catch her breath. The night was cool, and the stars overhead were brilliant in the clear Arizona sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and the sound made her shiver. But she kept walking, driven by a desperate need she could not fully articulate. The ranch house was dark when she finally arrived, but there was a lamp burning in the bunkhouse where the ranch hands stayed. Natalie approached on unsteady legs and knocked softly on the door, then immediately regretted it. What was she doing here? What did she expect Zachary to do? This was foolish, dangerous even. Gerald would be furious when he discovered she had left. The door opened and Zachary stood there in his undershirt and trousers, his hair mussed from sleep. His eyes widened when he saw her, and his expression shifted immediately from surprise to alarm. "Mrs. Morrison," he said, his voice tight with concern. "What happened? Come in, please." He stepped aside, and Natalie found herself moving into the warm interior of the bunkhouse. There were several bunks lining the walls, but most were empty. Apparently, Zachary was the only hand currently living here, though that made sense given that the ranch was understaffed. "I should not have come," Natalie said, her voice breaking. "I am sorry, I did not know where else to go." "You did the right thing," Zachary said firmly. He guided her to a chair and lit another lamp, bringing it close so he could see her better. When the light fell on her face, he made a sound low in his throat, something between a growl and a groan. "He did this to you." It was not a question, but Natalie nodded anyway, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "It is my fault. I make him angry. If I could just be a better wife." "No," Zachary said sharply, kneeling in front of her so they were at eye level. "No, Mrs. Morrison, this is not your fault. Nothing you could do would justify this. Do you understand me? This is not your fault." His words broke something inside her, some dam she had been holding in place for 2 years, and suddenly she was sobbing, great heaving gasps that made her ribs scream in protest but which she could not control. Zachary did not try to touch her, respecting her space, but he stayed close, his presence a steady anchor in the storm of her emotions. When she finally calmed enough to speak, she told him everything. The whole terrible story spilled out of her in a rush of words, all the pain and fear and hopelessness she had been carrying alone for so long. Zachary listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each revelation, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You have to leave him," Zachary said when she finished. "You cannot go back there. He will kill you eventually." "I have nowhere to go," Natalie said helplessly. "No money, no family. The law will not help me. I am his wife." "The law is wrong," Zachary said flatly. "And you are not his property, no matter what anyone says. You are a person, and you deserve to be treated with dignity and respect." He stood and paced the length of the small bunkhouse, clearly thinking hard. "You can stay here. There is an extra bunk and Marcus will not mind. He is a good man. We will figure out the rest later, but right now you need to be somewhere safe." Natalie wanted to accept, wanted it so badly it physically hurt, but the practicalities crashed down on her, cold and heavy. "Gerald will come looking for me. He will make a scene." "I cannot bring that kind of trouble to your doorstep." "Let him come," Zachary said, his voice hard. "I am not afraid of him, and neither is Marcus. We will handle it." He looked at her, his green eyes intense. Please, Mrs. Morrison, let us help you. You do not have to do this alone anymore." The kindness in his voice was almost more than she could bear. Natalie looked down at her hands, twisting in her lap, and made a decision that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." Zachary's shoulders sagged with relief. "Good, that is good. Now, let me look at your injuries. I have some experience with doctoring from my time on the trail." He was gentle as he examined her, his touch careful and professional. He determined that she likely had 2 cracked ribs, various bruises, and a mild concussion from hitting her head. He wrapped her ribs with strips of clean cloth, gave her willow bark tea for the pain, and insisted she lie down and rest. Natalie was too exhausted to argue. She lay on the bunk he indicated, and despite her fear and pain, she fell asleep almost immediately, her body finally surrendering to the desperate need for rest now that she felt safe. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through the bunkhouse windows, and she could hear voices outside. Panic seized her briefly, the fear that Gerald had found her already, but then she recognized Zachary's calm tones and a deeper voice she did not know. She sat up slowly, her ribs protesting, and made her way to the door. Outside, Zachary was talking to a man who had to be Marcus Henderson. Marcus was in his early 40s, weathered and strong, with kind eyes similar to Zachary's. Both men turned when they heard the door open, and Marcus immediately removed his hat. "Mrs. Morrison," he said respectfully. "Zachary told me what happened. You are welcome to stay here as long as you need. We have got a spare room in the main house that would be more comfortable than the bunkhouse if you would prefer." Natalie felt tears prick her eyes again at the simple, uncomplicated kindness. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson. I do not want to be a burden." "You are not a burden," Marcus said firmly. "What your husband did to you is wrong, plain and simple. We take care of our own around here, and anyone who needs help is one of our own." He glanced at Zachary. "I sent one of the boys into town this morning to let folks know you are safe. I figure Morrison will hear about it soon enough." As if summoned by the words, the sound of hoofbeats approached rapidly. Natalie felt her stomach drop as Gerald came into view, riding hard, his face purple with rage. He jerked his horse to a stop and dismounted in one violent motion, stalking toward them. "Natalie," he roared. "Get over here right now. You have got some nerve, running off in the middle of the night, making me look like a fool." Natalie took an involuntary step back, old fear rising up to choke her. But Zachary moved smoothly to put himself between her and Gerald, his posture relaxed but ready. "Mrs. Morrison is not going anywhere with you," Zachary said calmly. "She is under our protection now." Gerald's eyes narrowed dangerously. "She is my wife. You have got no right to keep her from me." "I've got every right to protect someone who is being hurt," Zachary replied, his voice still calm but with an edge of steel underneath. "You laid hands on her, Morrison. You beat her bloody. That ends now. What I do with my own wife is none of your business, Cowboy," Gerald snarled, taking a step forward. "Now get out of my way before I make you." Marcus stepped up beside Zachary, presenting a united front. "You should leave, Morrison. Mrs. Morrison is staying here, and that is final. If you try to force the issue, we will have problems." Gerald looked between them, clearly trying to calculate his chances. He was one man against 2, and both Zachary and Marcus were bigger and clearly more capable than he was. But his pride and anger were pushing him toward a confrontation he could not win. "Fine," Gerald spat finally. "Keep the worthless girl. See if I care. But she is still my wife in the eyes of the law, and I will be back with the marshal to collect what is mine." He mounted his horse and rode off at a gallop, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. Natalie released a breath she had not realized she was holding, but the relief was short-lived. Gerald was right. The law would likely side with him. A wife was her husband's property, and she had no legal grounds to refuse to return to him. "We will figure it out," Zachary said, turning to look at her with reassurance in his eyes. "I promise you, Mrs. Morrison, we will figure it out." Over the next few days, Natalie settled into life at the Henderson Ranch with a strange mixture of relief and anxiety. The spare room Marcus had mentioned turned out to be a small but comfortable space in the main house, with a real bed and a window that overlooked the corrals. Marcus's wife had died years ago, and he lived alone except for his ranch hands, so the house was simple and masculine but clean and well-maintained. Natalie tried to make herself useful, cooking meals for the men and helping with lighter chores around the ranch. Her ribs were healing slowly, and the bruises were beginning to fade. More importantly, she was beginning to remember what it felt like to not live in constant fear. She could breathe here, could move without wondering if she would be punished for some imagined slight. Zachary was kind but respectful, never pushing her to talk about what had happened, just offering his steady presence. She found herself watching him work with the horses, marveling at his patience and gentleness with the animals. He never raised his voice, never used force unnecessarily. He simply worked with the horses, understanding their nature and responding accordingly. It was a revelation to watch him. One evening, about a week after she had arrived at the ranch, Natalie was preparing dinner when Zachary came into the kitchen, dusty from a day's work. He washed up at the basin and then turned to her with a slight hesitation. "Mrs. Morrison, I was wondering if you might have a moment to talk," he said. "Of course," Natalie replied, setting down the knife she had been using to chop vegetables. "And please call me Natalie. Mrs. Morrison feels too formal given the circumstances." A small smile tugged at the corner of Zachary's mouth. "Only if you call me Zach." "All right, Zach," she said, testing the name on her tongue and finding it fit him well. Zachary pulled out a chair and sat, gesturing for her to do the same. When they were both seated, he leaned forward slightly, his expression serious. "I have been thinking about your situation, about what Morrison said about coming back with the marshal. He was right that the law will likely side with him if it comes down to it." Natalie's heart sank. She had known this, but hearing it stated so plainly still hurt. "I know. I have been trying not to think about it, but I know." "There might be a way around it," Zachary said slowly, "but it would require you to trust me, and I understand if you cannot do that yet. I am still practically a stranger." "What way?" Natalie asked, leaning forward despite herself. Zachary took a deep breath. "If you were not married to Morrison anymore, he would have no legal claim on you. Now, divorce is possible but difficult and expensive, and it can take years. But there is another option." He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "If Morrison died, you would be a widow free to make your own choices." Natalie felt her blood run cold. "Are you suggesting we kill him?" "No," Zachary said quickly, looking almost alarmed. "No, nothing like that." "I am sorry, I explained that badly. What I meant is that Morrison is a heavy drinker, and men like that often meet bad ends through their own choices. But that could take years, and you need help now." He ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated with himself. "What I am actually suggesting is that you could leave Arizona territory entirely, go somewhere Morrison could not follow, and start fresh with a new name." "Run away," Natalie said flatly. "More like run toward a new life," Zachary corrected gently. "I have some money saved up. It is not much, but it would be enough to get you to California, maybe San Francisco. You could disappear there, build a new life. You are clever and capable. You would find a way to make it work." Natalie considered this. The idea of running, of starting completely over in a place where no one knew her, where Gerald could not find her, it was tempting. But it was also terrifying. She would be alone in a strange city with no support, no connections. At least here, she had Zachary and Marcus looking out for her. "I appreciate the thought," she said carefully, "but I do not think I could do that alone. It is too frightening." "Then do not do it alone," Zachary said simply. "I will come with you." Natalie stared at him, certain she had misheard. "What?" "I will come with you," Zachary repeated, meeting her eyes steadily. "I am not tied to this place. I can find work anywhere. If you need someone to help you start over to make sure you are safe, I will do that." "But why?" Natalie asked, bewildered. "Why would you upend your entire life for someone you barely know?" Zachary was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was soft but certain. "Because you deserve better than what you have been given. Because I believe every person has the right to live without fear. And because, if I am being completely honest, I have developed feelings for you, Natalie. I know the timing is terrible, and I know you probably cannot reciprocate given everything you have been through. But I care about you, and I want to see you safe and happy. Even if that happiness does not include me." Natalie felt her breath catch. No one had ever spoken to her with such raw honesty, such genuine care. Gerald had never cared about her happiness, had never considered her feelings at all. And here was Zachary, offering to sacrifice his own comfort and stability just to help her, expecting nothing in return. "I do not know what to say," she whispered. "You do not have to say anything right now," Zachary assured her. "Just think about it. There is no rush. Morrison has not come back yet, and even if he does, we will handle it. You are safe here, and you can take all the time you need to decide what you want to do." Natalie nodded slowly, her mind whirling. She had spent so long believing that she had no options, no future beyond survival. The idea that she could choose something different, could actually build a life that belonged to her, it was almost too much to comprehend. Over the following weeks, Natalie found herself drawn to Zachary more and more. She watched the way he interacted with the world, with such basic decency and kindness, and it awakened something in her she thought had died. She began to realize that her feelings were growing beyond simple gratitude. She looked forward to seeing him each day, found excuses to be near him, and felt a flutter in her chest when he smiled at her. It terrified her. She had promised herself she would never trust a man again, never allow herself to be vulnerable. But Zachary was patient, never pushing, never demanding. He treated her like a person, asked her opinions, listened when she spoke. He made her laugh, something she had not done in years. Slowly, carefully, the walls around her heart began to crumble. One afternoon, Natalie was in the garden behind the main house, weeding the vegetable patch that Marcus had somewhat neglected since his wife's death. The work was peaceful, grounding, and she was so focused on it that she did not hear Zachary approach until he spoke. "Need any help?" he asked. Natalie looked up and smiled, shading her eyes from the sun. "I would not turn down an extra pair of hands." Zachary knelt beside her and began pulling weeds with practiced efficiency. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, and Natalie found herself acutely aware of his presence beside her, the warmth of his body, the occasional brush of his hand against hers as they reached for the same weed. "Can I ask you something?" Natalie said finally, sitting back on her heels. "Anything," Zachary replied, mirroring her posture. "Why have you really never married? You said you were waiting for the right woman, but I find it hard to believe that someone like you has not had opportunities." Zachary smiled slightly, but there was a hint of old pain in his eyes. "I suppose I have had opportunities, but my parents set a high bar for what marriage should look like. My father treated my mother as an equal partner in all things. He valued her opinions, supported her dreams, and they genuinely enjoyed each other's company. I saw what that looked like, and I refuse to settle for less." He paused, pulling at a stubborn weed. "I watched some of my friends marry for practical reasons or because it was expected, and many of them ended up miserable. I decided I would rather be alone than be in a marriage without true affection and respect." "That is rare, I think," Natalie said softly. "Most men do not think that way." "Most men are fools," Zachary said bluntly, and Natalie laughed, surprising herself. The sound felt foreign in her throat, but good, like rediscovering a forgotten language. Zachary's eyes lit up at her laughter, and his smile widened. "There it is," he said warmly. "I was beginning to think I would never hear you laugh." Natalie felt her cheeks warm. "I have not had much to laugh about in recent years." "Then I am honored to have reminded you how," Zachary said seriously. Then, carefully, as if testing the waters, he added, "I would like to do it again if you will let me." The meaning behind his words was clear, and Natalie felt her heart begin to race. This was a crossroads, a moment of decision. She could pull back, maintain her distance, protect herself from potential pain. Or she could take a leap of faith, trust that maybe, just maybe, not all men were like Gerald. "I would like that too," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing quietly but steadily. Zachary reached out slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away, and gently took her hand. His touch was warm and calloused and infinitely gentle, and Natalie felt tears spring to her eyes at the simple kindness of it. "You are going to be all right, Natalie," Zachary said softly. "I promise you that. Whatever happens, whatever you decide to do, you are going to be all right." Natalie nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She believed him, and that was perhaps the most remarkable thing of all. The peaceful interlude was shattered a few days later when Gerald finally made good on his threat. He arrived at the ranch mid-morning with Marshal Tom Cooper in tow, looking smug and vindictive. Natalie, who had been hanging laundry when they rode up, felt her blood turn to ice. Marcus and Zachary emerged from the barn, clearly alerted by the sound of horses. Marcus's expression was carefully neutral, but Zachary looked like he wanted to commit violence. "Marshal," Marcus said politely, "what can we do for you?" Marshal Cooper was a man in his 50s, weathered and tired, with the look of someone who had seen too much and cared too little. "I am here to collect Mrs. Morrison," he said without preamble. "Her husband has filed a complaint that she is being held here against her will." "That is not true," Natalie said, finding her voice despite her fear. "I left of my own free will, and I am staying here by choice." "Be that as it may, madam, you are still married to Mr. Morrison, and he has a legal right to his wife," the marshal said with what might have been sympathy. "I am afraid you need to return with him." "She is not going anywhere with him," Zachary said, his voice hard. "He beats her, Marshal. Look at her face, her arms. That is what he does to her." The marshal did look, and Natalie saw a flicker of discomfort cross his features, but he shook his head. "What happens between a man and his wife is not my concern unless it involves murder. I am sorry, Mrs. Morrison, but the law is clear." "The law is wrong," Zachary said flatly, echoing what he had told Natalie weeks ago. "Maybe so, but it is still the law," the marshal replied. "Now, Mrs. Morrison, please gather your things." Natalie felt paralyzed, caught between the past and the future. If she went with Gerald, she knew exactly what would happen. He would beat her worse than ever for the humiliation of having to fetch her, and her life would return to the nightmare it had been. But if she refused, the marshal might arrest Marcus and Zachary for interfering, and she could not bear to bring that kind of trouble down on them. Zachary met her eyes, and she saw a question there, a promise. If she wanted to run, he would help her. If she wanted to fight, he would stand beside her. Whatever she chose, he would support her. Natalie took a deep breath and made her choice. "I will get my things," she said quietly, and Zachary's face fell. But then she added, "But I want it known for the record that I am doing this under duress. I do not want to go back to my husband, and I believe he is a danger to me." "Noted," the marshal said, though his tone suggested it would make no difference. Natalie went to her room and gathered the few possessions she had brought with her, moving slowly, her mind racing. When she came back out, Zachary was waiting by the porch, his expression tortured. "You do not have to do this," he said urgently, keeping his voice low so the others would not hear. "We can leave right now, both of us, head for the border." "And have you branded an outlaw?" Natalie shook her head. "No, I will not do that to you, but this is not over, Zach. I am not giving up. I just need to figure out another way." "Be safe," Zachary said, his voice rough with emotion. "Please, Natalie, be safe." "I will try," she promised, then walked over to where Gerald waited on his horse, looking triumphant. The ride back to town was silent and tense, the marshal riding slightly ahead, clearly uncomfortable with the whole situation. The moment they were back in their living quarters above the general store, Gerald rounded on her with a fury that took her breath away. "You humiliated me," he hissed, grabbing her by the throat and slamming her against the wall. "Running off to play house with that cowboy, making me look like a fool in front of the whole town." Natalie clawed at his hand, gasping for air, black spots dancing at the edges of her vision. Gerald held her there for a long moment, then released her suddenly, letting her crumple to the floor. "You are never leaving this house again," he said coldly. "You will stay here and you will remember your place. Do you understand me?" Natalie nodded, coughing and wheezing, her throat on fire. Gerald kicked her once in the ribs, right where they were still healing, and she bit back a scream. Then he left, locking the door from the outside. The next week was a special kind of hell. Gerald kept her locked in their quarters, only allowing her out to work in the store under his watchful eye. He barely fed her, and when he did, it was scraps. At night, he would come home drunk and take out his rage on her body. Natalie endured it in a haze of pain and despair, feeling herself breaking in ways that might never heal, but she held on to one thought, one thin thread of hope. Zachary had promised to help her, and she believed him. She did not know how or when, but she had faith that he would find a way. The opportunity came unexpectedly. One night, Gerald came home drunker than usual, barely able to stand. He stumbled toward Natalie with clear intent to hurt her, but his coordination was so impaired that when she ducked aside, he crashed headfirst into the corner of the table. The sound of his skull cracking against the wood was sickeningly loud, and he went down like a felled tree. Natalie stood frozen, staring at his motionless form. For a terrible moment she thought she had killed him, and a wave of relief and terror washed over her in equal measure. But then he groaned and stirred, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. He was alive, but unconscious. This was her chance. Natalie did not hesitate. She grabbed her shawl and the small amount of money she had managed to hide away from Gerald's pilfering, and she ran. Down the stairs, out into the cool night air, her feet pounding against the hard, packed earth of Springerville's streets. She did not look back, did not stop, just ran with everything she had toward the one place she knew she would be safe. The Henderson ranch was dark when she arrived, but she pounded on the bunkhouse door until Zachary answered, his hair mussed from sleep, his eyes widening when he saw her. "Natalie," he breathed, then pulled her inside without another word. "What happened?" Gerald hit his head. "He is unconscious but alive," Natalie gasped out, her lungs burning from the run. "I could not stay there anymore, Zach. I could not." "You do not have to," Zachary said firmly. "We are leaving right now. California, just like I suggested. We will be gone before Morrison even wakes up." "But the law," Natalie protested weakly. The law can go to hell, Zachary said bluntly. I am not letting you go back to him, Natalie. Not ever. Now, we can stand here and debate this, or we can start packing. What is it going to be? Natalie looked at him, at this good, kind man who was willing to risk everything for her, and made her decision. We pack. They worked quickly and quietly, gathering supplies and saddling horses. Marcus woke and came to see what the commotion was, and when Zachary explained, he simply nodded and went to fetch more provisions. Take the Appaloosa mare, Marcus said to Natalie. She is gentle but has good endurance. You will need that. He pressed a small pouch into her hand. Some extra money for the road. I wish you both well. Thank you, Natalie said, her voice thick with emotion, for everything. Take care of each other, Marcus replied, then clasped Zachary's hand in a firm shake. Safe travels, my friend. Within an hour, they were riding out of the ranch, heading west under a sky full of stars. Natalie felt a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration. She was leaving everything she had ever known, riding into an uncertain future with a man she had known for less than 2 months. It was terrifying. It was also the most alive she had felt in years. They rode hard for the first few days, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and Springerville. Zachary was an experienced trail rider, and he knew how to cover their tracks, how to choose routes that would be difficult to follow. Natalie trusted his judgment completely. At night, they made camp in secluded spots, and Zachary was always a perfect gentleman, giving her privacy and space, never presuming anything. But as the days turned into weeks and the immediate danger began to feel more distant, Natalie found herself wanting less space between them. She would watch him across the campfire, admiring the way the firelight played across his features, and feel a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the flames. One evening, about 3 weeks into their journey, Natalie finally voiced what had been growing in her heart. They had stopped for the night near a small creek, and after they had eaten, they sat together watching the water flow by, listening to the night sounds of the desert. Zach, Natalie said softly. Can I tell you something? Always, he replied, turning to look at her. I think I am falling in love with you, she said, the words tumbling out before she could second-guess them. I know that is probably foolish, given everything, and I know I am still married, at least on paper, but I cannot help how I feel. You have shown me what kindness looks like, what respect looks like. You have given me back my life. How could I not love you? Zachary was quiet for a moment, and Natalie felt a flash of panic that she had misread everything, that she had ruined their friendship with her confession. But then he reached out and gently cupped her face with his hand, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone with infinite tenderness. I fell in love with you the first time I saw you, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Standing in that store with bruises on your face and strength in your eyes. You were broken but not defeated, and I knew in that moment that I would do anything to help you. I have been in love with you every day since, Natalie, and I will be in love with you for the rest of my life if you will let me. Natalie felt tears stream down her face, but for the first time in so long they were happy tears. I want that, she whispered. I want a life with you. Zachary leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but Natalie did not want to pull away. She wanted this, wanted him, wanted to know what it felt like to be kissed by someone who actually cared about her. Their lips met in a kiss that was gentle and sweet and full of promise, and Natalie felt something inside her heal, some wounded part of her soul beginning to knit back together. When they pulled apart, Zachary rested his forehead against hers. We will figure out the legal side eventually, he said. Once we get to California, we can look into getting you a divorce, or maybe we can just live as if we are married, build a life together. But whatever we do, we will do it together. Together, Natalie agreed, and the word felt like a vow. They reached California in late summer, dusty and tired but hopeful. San Francisco was everything Natalie had imagined and more, a bustling city full of life and opportunity. It was also blessedly anonymous. No one here knew her or cared about her past. She and Zachary could simply be whoever they chose to be. Zachary found work quickly at a stable on the outskirts of the city, and his skill with horses made him valuable. Natalie got a job at a dry goods store, and her experience running the general store in Springerville served her well. They rented a small house together, modest but clean, and began building a life. At first, they maintained separate bedrooms, conscious of propriety and Natalie's need for space and time to heal. But as months passed, and Natalie grew more comfortable, more certain in Zachary's love and respect for her, the walls between them came down. On a cool October evening, Natalie knocked on Zachary's bedroom door and asked if she could sleep beside him, just to be close. Zachary had held her gently that night, asking for nothing, just offering comfort and warmth, and it had been the most peaceful sleep Natalie could remember. Their physical relationship progressed slowly, at Natalie's pace, with Zachary always checking, always making sure she was comfortable. When they finally made love for the first time, on a spring night nearly a year after they had fled Arizona, it was nothing like Natalie's experiences with Gerald. Zachary was gentle and patient, attentive to her needs, making sure she felt safe and cherished. It was a revelation, this discovery that intimacy could be something beautiful rather than something to be endured. After 2 years in California, they decided to make their relationship legal. Natalie had heard through a letter from Marcus Henderson that Gerald had died, his liver finally giving out from years of heavy drinking. Natalie felt a complicated mixture of relief and sadness at the news. Relief that she was truly free, but sadness for the waste of a life, for what Gerald could have been if he had chosen differently. With Gerald's death confirmed, there was no legal barrier to Natalie and Zachary marrying. They had a simple ceremony with a few friends they had made in San Francisco, and Natalie became Mrs. Natalie Dalton in truth as well as in heart. Standing before the minister, saying vows that she actually meant this time, Natalie marveled at the difference. This was a partnership freely chosen, built on love and respect. This was what marriage was supposed to be. Their life together was not perfect. Natalie still had nightmares sometimes, still flinched at sudden movements, still carried the scars of her past both visible and invisible. But Zachary was patient, always patient, helping her heal at her own pace. And slowly, year by year, the nightmares became less frequent, the flinching less automatic, the scars less painful. 3 years into their marriage, Natalie discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. Her own experience of marriage and family had been so twisted that she worried she would not know how to be a good mother. But Zachary reassured her, reminding her that she had a loving heart, and that was the most important thing. Their son was born in the spring of 1880, a healthy boy with Zachary's green eyes and Natalie's dark hair. They named him Daniel, after Zachary's father, and Natalie fell instantly and completely in love with the tiny life they had created together. Holding Daniel in her arms, watching Zachary cradle their son with such gentleness, Natalie felt a sense of completeness she had never imagined possible. Zachary was an involved father, sharing the work of caring for Daniel equally with Natalie. He changed diapers and walked the floor with a crying baby and sang lullabies in his deep, rumbling voice. He treated fatherhood as the privilege it was, and watching him with their son, Natalie fell in love with him all over again. As Daniel grew from infant to toddler to young boy, Natalie watched carefully for any signs that he might have inherited his father's temperament, any hints of violence or cruelty. But Daniel was gentle and kind, with Zachary's patient nature and Natalie's compassionate heart. He was curious and bright, always asking questions, always wanting to understand how things worked. When Daniel was 4, Natalie gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Rose. She was a sunny, happy baby who smiled at everything and everyone, and she completed their family perfectly. Zachary had saved enough money from his work at the stables to open his own small ranch on the outskirts of San Francisco, breeding and training horses, and the work was fulfilling and profitable. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Zachary worked with the horses, teaching Daniel about animals and responsibility. Natalie managed the household and helped with the business end of the ranch, keeping the books and corresponding with buyers. In the evenings, they would sit together as a family, Zachary telling stories or Natalie reading aloud while the children listened with rapt attention. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Zachary surprised Natalie with a trip back to Arizona. She had been hesitant at first, worried about stirring up painful memories, but Zachary assured her that facing the past might help her find even more peace. They visited Springerville, finding it much changed. The general store Gerald had run into the ground had been taken over by someone else and was thriving. The town had grown, new buildings sprouting up along the main street. But the Henderson Ranch was still there, and Marcus welcomed them warmly, delighted to meet their children. "You did good," Marcus told them, watching Daniel and Rose play in the yard while the adults sat on the porch. "Both of you. You took a terrible situation and turned it into something beautiful." Standing in the place where her nightmare had unfolded, surrounded by people she loved, Natalie realized Marcus was right. She had survived, and more than that, she had thrived. She had learned that marriage did not have to mean pain, that love could be gentle and kind, that family could be a source of joy rather than fear. That night, lying in bed beside Zachary in the guest room at the Henderson Ranch, Natalie reflected on how far she had come. From the broken, terrified woman who had fled this place 15 years ago to the confident, happy woman she was now, the journey had been long and difficult, but it had been worth it. "Thank you," she whispered to Zachary in the darkness. "For what?" he asked, pulling her closer. "For showing me what love really means," Natalie said. "For being patient with me, for believing in me even when I could not believe in myself, for giving me a life worth living." "You gave me the same thing," Zachary replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "We saved each other, Natalie." That is what love does. They returned to California and their ranch, where life continued its happy course. Daniel grew into a responsible young man who shared his father's gift with horses. Rose became a spirited young woman with a talent for drawing, sketching the horses and landscapes around the ranch with skill beyond her years. When Daniel turned 20, he announced his intention to marry a young woman named Sarah, whom he had been courting for 2 years. Natalie and Zachary gave their blessing, delighted to see their son entering into marriage with eyes wide open, choosing a partner who clearly adored him and whom he treated with respect and affection. The wedding was a joyful affair, held at the ranch with friends and neighbors gathered to celebrate. Rose married at 22, to a kind teacher named Thomas who appreciated her artistic nature and encouraged her creativity. Natalie cried happy tears at both weddings, grateful beyond words that her children would know the kind of love she had found with Zachary, that they would never have to endure what she had suffered in her first marriage. As grandchildren began to arrive, Natalie and Zachary entered a new phase of life. They were older now, Zachary's dark hair gone gray, Natalie's face lined with the marks of years well lived. But they were happy, deeply and truly happy, surrounded by family and working a ranch they had built together. One evening, when they were both in their 60s, Natalie and Zachary sat together on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sun set over the California hills. Their 4 grandchildren were playing in the yard under their parents' watchful eyes, and the sound of their laughter filled the air. "You ever regret it?" Natalie asked suddenly. "Giving up your life in Arizona to run away with me? We were basically strangers." Zachary took her hand, his grip still strong despite the years. "Not for a single moment," he said firmly. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Natalie Dalton. These years with you, building this life, raising our children, they have been the greatest privilege of my existence." "I would do it all again in a heartbeat." Natalie smiled, squeezing his hand back. "I love you, Zachary Dalton, more than I ever thought it was possible to love another person." "And I love you," Zachary replied. "Always have, always will." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Natalie reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. She had started her adult life believing that marriage meant pain, that love was a fairy tale, that her role was to endure rather than to thrive. But a gentle cowboy with kind eyes had shown her the truth. That love was real, that marriage could be a partnership of equals, that happiness was not just possible but something she deserved. She had learned that healing was not a destination but a journey, one that required patience and support and the courage to be vulnerable again. She had learned that the past did not have to define the future, that even the deepest wounds could scar over and fade with time. Most importantly, she had learned that she was stronger than she had ever imagined, capable of not just surviving but of building something beautiful from the ashes of her pain. The years continued to pass gently. Zachary and Natalie eventually handed over the day-to-day operations of the ranch to Daniel and his family, though they still helped out when they could. They spent their days enjoying the simple pleasures of life, tending a small garden, reading together in the evenings, playing with their growing number of grandchildren, and taking slow rides through the hills they had come to love. When Natalie was 71, Zachary fell ill with pneumonia. Despite the doctor's best efforts, his condition worsened over the course of a week. Natalie sat by his bedside day and night, holding his hand, talking to him about their life together, all the memories they had made. Their children and grandchildren came to say goodbye, and Zachary greeted each one with love and encouragement, telling them how proud he was of the people they had become. On his last night, when it was just the two of them again, Zachary squeezed Natalie's hand weakly. "No regrets," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "No regrets," Natalie agreed, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for the most wonderful life, my love." "See you on the other side," Zachary said with a faint smile, and then he was gone, slipping away as peacefully as he had lived. Natalie mourned deeply, but without despair. She had been blessed with 48 years of marriage to the kindest man she had ever known, years filled with love and laughter and genuine partnership. She had children who adored her, grandchildren who brought her joy, and a lifetime of beautiful memories. Zachary's death was painful, but it was not tragic. They had lived fully, loved deeply, and built something that would outlast them both. She lived another 12 years after Zachary's death, remaining on the ranch that they had built together, surrounded by family. She told her grandchildren stories about their grandfather, about the gentle cowboy who had saved her and shown her what love really meant. She made sure they understood that relationships should be built on respect and kindness, that no one should ever have to endure what she had endured in her first marriage. When Natalie finally passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 83, she was laid to rest beside Zachary on a gentle hillside on the ranch property. Their graves overlooked the land they had loved, the horses grazing peacefully in the fields below, the house where they had raised their children still standing strong. Daniel and Rose ensured that their parents' legacy continued. The ranch remained in the family, passed down through the generations, and with it came the story of how it had all begun. With a terrified woman fleeing an abusive marriage and a kind cowboy willing to risk everything to help her. It became a family legend, a reminder that love should be gentle, that courage could be found in the darkest moments, and that it was never too late to choose a better life. The Dalton family prospered over the years, but they never forgot the lessons learned from Natalie and Zachary's story. They treated each other with respect, built marriages based on equality and affection, and passed down the values that had saved Natalie all those years ago. In this way, Zachary's kindness and Natalie's courage echoed through the generations, touching lives far beyond what either of them could have imagined when they first met in that dusty general store in Springerville, Arizona. And so their story ended not with pain or regret, but with love that had transformed not just their own lives, but the lives of everyone who came after them. Natalie had learned that marriage did not have to mean suffering, and through her example, she had taught countless others the same lesson. The gentle cowboy had indeed shown her what love really meant, and together, they had built a legacy that would endure long after they were gone, a testament to the transformative power of genuine kindness, respect, and love.